The sun had just begun to rise over Mountain View, California, its soft light spilling over glass buildings that reflected both ambition and exhaustion. Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, sat quietly in the backseat of his car. His driver asked softly if he wanted to stop by the office early, but Sundar shook his head. He felt restless. Something within him told him that today would not be an ordinary day. The car rolled past the sleek streets of Silicon Valley, the very heart of global innovation, but Sundar's eyes wandered beyond the tall headquarters and polished signs. He often thought about how, behind these glowing facades, there were stories untold. Stories of struggle, sacrifice, and survival. He himself had walked that difficult road many years ago in India, with nothing but dreams and determination. And now, as CEO, he never let himself forget those beginnings. "Let's stop here for coffee," Sundar suddenly told his driver, pointing at a busy intersection where McDonald's stood. It was unusual for him to request such a stop. He usually started his day at the office or home, not in a fast food chain. But today, something about the ordinary crowd gathering at that place drew him in. Perhaps he was searching for something grounding, something real. As he walked inside, people barely noticed him. In his simple shirt and quiet presence, he did not look like the head of one of the world's largest companies. Sundar actually preferred it that way. The smell of fresh fries and brewed coffee filled the air. He joined the short line, pulling out his wallet casually. But then something caught his eye at the counter. A man, slightly older than Sundar, stood in a bright yellow uniform with a cap pulled low over his head. He moved slowly but efficiently, handing out orders, cleaning trays, and greeting customers with forced cheerfulness. Sundar froze for a moment. There was something strangely familiar about the man's face. The lines of age were there, yes, but behind them, Sundar could see intelligence, sharpness, and a hint of pride that could not be erased by time. He knew that face. In fact, he had once admired it. His mind raced, connecting pieces of the past, until a shocking realization struck him. This was Rajesh Menon, a former senior director at Google. Years ago, Rajesh had been a star in the company. Brilliant, articulate, and deeply respected, he was one of the people who had guided young engineers and shaped projects that made headlines across the world. Sundar remembered sitting in conference rooms, listening to Rajesh's ideas. People leaned forward when he spoke. His words carried vision and authority. But now, here he was, serving burgers and fries at a McDonald's, his hands smelling of grease instead of ink on whiteboards. Sundar's heart tightened. He wanted to call out, to ask why, to understand how such a fall had happened, but he held back. Instead, he watched quietly as Rajesh passed a tray to a young customer, smiling, though his eyes looked weary. Sundar placed his own order, a coffee, and a sandwich just to keep watching. "Order 52, Rajesh said, his voice calm, professional, almost identical to how he once spoke in boardrooms. And then his eyes lifted. For the first time, he saw Sundar standing in front of him. Rajes, a single quotes, S expression faltered. Recognition flickered in his tired eyes, followed by something else, shame. He forced a smile, one that barely hid his discomfort. "Mr. Pichai," he said softly, almost whispering, as if speaking the name too loudly would break his fragile disguise. Sundar leaned forward, his voice gentle. "Rajesh, it's been a long time." Silence hung in the air. Behind them, customers shuffled, unaware of the emotional storm brewing at the counter. Rajesh quickly looked away, handing Sundar's coffee, pretending nothing had happened. "Enjoy your meal," he said, his voice firm but his hands trembling slightly. Sundar did not move. He felt the weight of the moment, the clash between past greatness and present struggle. He wanted to ask, "What happened to you?" But the words felt too heavy, too cruel for this setting. So instead, he quietly took a seat in the corner, his eyes never leaving Rajes. As Sundar sipped his coffee, memories came rushing back. He remembered the day Rajesh had congratulated him on his promotion, the times Rajesh had defended his ideas in meetings when others doubted him, the way he had carried himself with pride and humility. And now he was working behind a counter, overlooked by strangers who had no idea of his past achievements. Sundar knew there was a story here, a story of resilience, or perhaps of heartbreak. He could feel it in the way Rayesh moved, in the way his eyes avoided meeting anyone's for too long. And Sundar also knew one thing clearly. He could not walk away. Not today. After finishing his coffee, Sundar waited until the rush slowed down. Then he walked back to the counter. "Rayesh," he said softly, "can we talk? Outside, maybe?" Rayesh hesitated, glancing nervously at his manager, who stood nearby. The manager, unaware of the history between these two men, nodded impatiently. "Go on. Take 5, he said, waving his hand. And just like that, Rayesh removed his cap, wiped his forehead, and followed Sundar outside. The cool morning breeze greeted them. They stood near the parking lot, cars rushing by, the golden arches shining above. Rayesh finally broke the silence. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice heavy. "Not like this." Sundar shook his head. "I didn't come here for this, but now that I'm here, I want to know." "What happened, Rayesh? You were one of the brightest minds we had. You inspired so many. How did you end up here?" Rayesh looked down at his hands, rough from long shifts, a faint burn mark visible on his wrist. For a long time he didn't speak. Then, with a deep sigh, he began. "Life happened, Sundar. And not the kind of life you read about in magazines. The kind that takes everything you've built and breaks it piece by piece." His voice trembled, but there was a quiet strength in it too. "I'll tell you everything, but you might not look at me the same way again." Sundar's eyes softened. "Rayesh, nothing will change the respect I have for you. Please, tell me." And just as Rayesh was about to speak, the manager stormed out of the restaurant, his voice shook. "Rayesh, your break is over. Get back inside now." Rayesh's face tightened. He looked at Sundar with regret, as if the words he wanted to share had been stolen from his mouth. "Not now," he whispered. "Maybe later." Sundar watched as Rayesh put his cap back on and walked inside, his shoulders heavy with burdens unseen. Sundar stood frozen, gripping his coffee cup, his mind racing with questions. He had never felt so unsettled, so determined to uncover the truth. As the door closed behind Rayesh, Sundar whispered to himself, "I won't let this go. I need to know what happened to him." The world kept moving, cars honking, people laughing inside the restaurant. But Sundar felt as though time itself had paused, leaving him at the edge of a story that could change everything. And in that moment, he knew this was only the beginning. The day dragged on for Sundar. But his mind was not at the office, not in the endless meetings or in the mountain of emails waiting for his approval. Even as engineers pitched ideas and managers reported numbers, he found himself replaying the sight of Rayesh Menon in that yellow uniform, his once proud eyes dulled by exhaustion. Sundar had seen many unusual things in his career, but nothing had shaken him quite like this. It was not simply about surprise, it was about injustice, about seeing brilliance buried under circumstances no one yet understood. That night, instead of resting, Sundar sat by the large window in his home, the lights of Silicon Valley blinking in the distance. His wife noticed his silence and asked if everything was all right. He nodded faintly, unwilling to burden her yet with the weight of what he had discovered. Deep down, he knew Rayesh's story was not just about one man. It was about all those who had given their lives to innovation, only to be forgotten when life pushed them off the fast track. He felt almost responsible, as though he had a duty to listen, to act out the next morning. Sundar returned to the same McDonald's. He arrived earlier, before the morning rush. The place was quieter, with only a few customers scattered about. Sundar ordered another coffee and sat by the corner, waiting patiently. When Rayesh finally walked in from the back, tying his apron and adjusting his cap, Sundar stood and approached him. "Rayesh," he said gently, "I don't want to intrude, but I meant what I said yesterday. I want to hear your story. You once stood by me when I was unsure of myself. Now let me stand by you." Rayesh hesitated. He looked around, then lowered his voice. I can't talk here. People will hear. Meet me tonight after my shift. Sundar agreed without a second thought. Hours later, when the evening crowd had thinned, Sundar waited outside again. The air smelled of fries and asphalt. Finally, Rajesh emerged, his steps slow, his shoulders hunched. He gestured toward a small park across the street where they found a bench under a flickering streetlight for a long while. Rajesh said nothing. He just sat there staring at his hands as though they carried the weight of his entire life. Finally, with a deep sigh, he began. Do you remember the Android launch back in 2011? He asked. Sundar nodded. How could he forget? It had been one of the biggest turning points in Google's history, and Rajesh had been right at the heart of it. I was leading one of the core teams back then, Rajesh continued. My life looked perfect on the outside, high salary, influence, people respected me. But behind closed doors, my marriage was crumbling. My wife said I was never home. My son, he was struggling in school. I thought I could fix everything later, once the project was done, but later never came. His voice cracked. One night, I came home and found the house empty. My wife had taken my son and left. She said she couldn't compete with Google anymore. That broke me in ways I can't even describe. I tried to keep working, burying myself in deadlines, but my mind wasn't there. Mistakes started slipping in. Eventually, I was asked to step aside. I thought it was temporary, but weeks turned into months. I spiraled. Drinking, depression, debts. I lost everything. Even my home. Sundar felt his chest tighten. This was not the Rajesh he remembered, the confident director who once inspired an entire generation of engineers. This was a man stripped of everything, reduced to survival. RGES, single quotes, S eyes glistened under the dim light. I ended up taking odd jobs. Sometimes cleaning offices, sometimes delivering groceries, and finally, here, at McDonald's. It's not glamorous, but it pays just enough for rent in a shared apartment. People here don't know who I was, and I prefer it that way. Less shame. He laughed bitterly. Funny, isn't it? I once spoke at global conferences about the future of technology. Now I ask if customers want extra ketchup. Sundar sat in silence, absorbing every word. Part of him wanted to argue, to remind Rajesh of his worth, but another part knew that what Rajesh needed most was not speeches, but someone who would listen without judgment. After a pause, Sundar finally spoke. Rajesh, I can't pretend to know the depth of your pain, but I do know this: you're not defined by where you are right now. You built ideas that touched millions. Those ideas still exist. You still exist. Don't let this be the end of your story. Rajesh shook his head. It's too late, Sundar. The industry moves fast. People forget. No one will take me seriously anymore. Not after all this. That's where you're wrong, Sundar said firmly. I haven't forgotten. And I won't let others forget either. Their eyes met, and for the first time in years, Rajesh saw something he thought had long vanished: hope reflected back at him. But just as the silence began to ease, a shadow approached them. A young man, scruffy and restless, stepped into the dim light. His voice was sharp, almost mocking. So this is where you're hiding, old man. Rajesh stiffened. Sundar glanced between them, sensing sudden tension. Who is this? Sundar asked, quietly. Rajesh's face paled. Someone I never wanted you to meet, the young man smirked. You owe me money, Rajesh. A lot of money. And you think sitting here with your rich friend will make it go away? Sundar's hand tightened around the bench. He could feel trouble brewing, danger edging into the fragile space where vulnerability had just been shared. Rajesh's secret life was unraveling faster than either of them expected. And as the young man stepped closer, Sundar realized this was not just a story of failure and resilience. It was a story that had just crossed into something much darker. Asterisk, the air around the park bench grew heavy. The night carrying a strange stillness, broken only by the buzz of the street lamp above them. Sundar's sharp eyes studied the young man who now stood before them. He couldn't have been older than his late 20s, but his face carried the kind of hardness that life often forced too early. His clothes were worn, his sneakers muddy, and his tone was laced with the arrogance of someone who believed he had power over another man's fear. Rayesh's body language changed instantly. His shoulders hunched, his breathing grew shallow, and his gaze dropped to the ground. Sundar had never seen him like this, not even in the most high-pressure boardroom debates. Rayesh, who once spoke boldly to a room full of executives, now looked like a man cornered. "You owe me $5,000, Rayesh," the young man said, his voice cutting through the quiet. "And I'm tired of waiting." Sundar's brow furrowed. $5,000, an amount that might have seemed insignificant in Silicon Valley circles. Yet the way Rayesh flinched told a different story. This was no ordinary debt. "Listen, Arjun," Rayesh said softly, his voice trembling. "I told you. I just need more time. I'll pay. I promise. Arjun." The name hit Sundar like a faint bell in his memory. Rayesh had once spoken of a nephew named Arjun, a boy who used to visit the office occasionally during school breaks, curious about computers. Sundar remembered a wide-eyed teenager with a spark of curiosity. And now that same boy had grown into this hardened figure standing in front of them, demanding money with a sneer. "More time." Arjun spat. "You've been saying that for months. Do you think I'm running a charity? I put my neck on the line for you. I cleared your medical bills when you couldn't. I got you this job when no one else would take you in. And this is how you repay me." Sundar's eyes flickered toward Rayesh. "Medical bills?" Suddenly, the roughness of his hands, the tired look in his eyes, the way he clutched his wrist, it all started to form a darker picture. Rayesh hadn't just fallen from grace. His body had betrayed him too. "Arjun, please," Rayesh whispered. "I'm not avoiding you. I can't keep up with the interest you've added. Every week it grows. I can't breathe under it." Arjun stepped closer, his voice lowering into something more menacing. "Then maybe it's time you learn what happens when people don't pay me back." Sundar rose from the bench, his calm but firm presence breaking through the tension. "Enough," he said, his voice quiet yet commanding. "This isn't the place, and this isn't the way. I don't know the full story, but threatening him won't solve anything." Arjun turned sharply, sizing up Sundar. For a moment, his bravado faltered as recognition flickered in his eyes. "Wait, aren't you?" He trailed off, squinting in the dim light. Then his lips curled into a half smile. "Well, this is interesting." Sundar Pichai himself, sitting on a bench with my uncle. Now that's a headline. Rayesh's head snapped up, panic etched across his face. "Don't. Arjun. Please don't involve him." But Arjun was already circling the situation in his mind. Sundar could see it. The opportunist's instinct. The hunger for leverage. "Maybe this is my lucky day," Arjun said. "You see, Rayesh, if you can't pay me back, maybe your friend here can. I mean, he runs Google. $5,000 is nothing to him. A single swipe of his card and we're done." Rayesh's voice cracked with desperation. "No, Sundar, don't. This is my burden. I won't let you be dragged into it." Sundar, however, stayed calm, though his heart was beating faster. He had faced negotiations with some of the most ruthless business minds in the world, but this was different. This wasn't about contracts or billion-dollar deals. This was raw human survival. "Arjun," Sundar said, meeting the young man's eyes steadily, "money is not the issue here. Dignity is, respect is. You say you helped him, but now you're chaining him with impossible interest. Do you really think crushing him further will make you whole? Or will it simply destroy the last family bond you have left?" For a moment, Sundar thought he saw hesitation flicker across Arjun's face, but it was quickly buried under a hardened laugh. "Nice speech, Mr. CEO, but this isn't the boardroom. This is the real world. And in the real world, people pay what they owe her. They pay in other ways." He leaned closer to Rayesh, his voice cold. "You've got until Friday. $5,000, cash. or you'll wish you never walked into my life again. With that, Arjun turned and walked away into the shadows, his footsteps echoing against the pavement. Rayesh slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. Sundar sat beside him again, silent at first, letting the weight of the encounter sink in. After a long pause, he asked softly, "How did it come to this, Rayesh? How did Arjun, your own blood, become your enemy?" Rayesh lifted his head slowly, his eyes hollow but glistening. "Because I failed him. When his father, my brother, died, I promised I would look after him, but I was drowning in my own life. I couldn't guide him. He drifted. Wrong friends, wrong choices. Now he runs with people who survive by exploiting weakness, and to him, I am the weakest of them all." His voice cracked, breaking Sundar's heart. "I've lost everything, Sundar. My family, my career, my respect, and now I've even lost him." The words hung heavy in the cool night air. Sundar felt a fire stir within him. He could not allow this story to end here. Not for Rayesh. Not for the boy who had once been curious and full of potential. He placed a hand on Rayesh's shoulder. "This isn't the end, I promise you. We'll find a way out of this. Not just the debt, but all of it." Rayesh looked at him, hope flickering faintly. "Why, Sundar? Why would you risk yourself for me? I'm just a man who failed." Sundar's gaze was steady. "Because you once believed in me when no one else did. Because no one deserves to be forgotten. And because sometimes the world needs to be reminded that dignity is worth fighting for." Before Rayesh could respond, the sound of footsteps returned. Sundar turned sharply, expecting Arjun, but it wasn't him. Instead, two unfamiliar men emerged from the shadows, their eyes locked on Rayesh. One of them muttered, "That's him." Rayesh's face drained of color. "Oh no," he whispered. Sundar's single quotes as heart pounded. "Who are they?" Rayesh swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "Not Arjun's friends. Something worse. I thought I left them behind." The two men stepped closer, their presence radiating danger. And Sundar realized in that moment whatever trouble Rayesh was in. It ran far deeper than family debts. The two men stopped just a few feet from the park bench. They were different. Arjun older, heavier, and far more dangerous. Their movements were slow, deliberate, like predators that didn't need to rush because they already knew their prey had nowhere to go. One wore a leather jacket, scuffed and torn. The other a plain gray hoodie pulled low over his face. Both carried an aura that made Sundar's instincts flare with caution. Rayesh froze, his body stiff as stone. His lips barely moved when he whispered, "And they shouldn't have found me here." His voice was brittle, the sound of a man whose nightmares had finally taken shape. The man in the leather jacket gave a dry laugh. "Rayesh Menon, I thought you vanished. But you're not that hard to find, are you? Especially when you leave." "Debt's behind." Sundar felt the muscles in his jaw tighten. He wanted to step in, but he knew too little. If he spoke too soon, he risked making things worse. So he stayed silent, his eyes locked on the men, waiting for their next move. The man in the hoodie pulled out a folded piece of paper and waved it. "Remember this? The agreement you signed? You owe us, and running into the arms of a fast food counter doesn't change a thing." Rayesh's shoulders sagged. "I told you I have nothing left. I've lost everything. What more can you take from me?" The man's eyes glinted cold. "That's the problem, Rayesh. You still think you have nothing left. But you do. You've got time, you've got skills, and you've got people who care enough to sit beside you. Maybe it's time you start repaying in other ways." His gaze shifted deliberately to Sundar. For the first time that evening, Sundar felt the weight of being recognized not as a quiet stranger, but as the CEO of one of the most powerful companies in the world. The man smirked. Well, what do we have here? The mighty Sundar Pichai himself, sharing a bench with a man who owes us money. Interesting company you keep, Mr. Geo. Sundar did not flinch. He had spent his life mastering calmness under pressure, and he wasn't about to break now. "This is between you and Rayesh," he said evenly. "Leave me out of it." The man in the leather jacket leaned closer, his voice sharp. You think you can just walk away, mister? Pichai? The fact you're here already ties you to this mess. In our world, once you're in, you're in. Reyes shook his head, panic rising. No, don't drag him into this. He has nothing to do with me. But Sundar, though quiet, felt a fire stirring inside him. He had spent his life believing in fairness and giving people dignity and second chances. And here was a man he once admired, now cornered and humiliated, being torn apart by people who thrived on fear. Sundar realized he couldn't just sit back and do nothing. He leaned forward, his voice steady. Tell me what you want. The man in the hoodie smirked. We want what we're owed, $50,000, with interest. Pay it, and we disappear. Don't pay, and, well, accidents happen. Jobs vanish. Lives crumble further than you can imagine. Raish's eyes widened. 50,000? That's not what I owed. It was barely 10. The man sneered. Gets grow, old man. You know that. Every month you delayed, it grew. Now it's 50. And it's not just money anymore, it's principle. Sundar sat back, his mind racing. $50,000 wasn't impossible for him to pay. It was less than the cost of one corporate dinner he often hosted. But something about the way these men spoke told him this wasn't just about money. If he paid once, they'd come back again. Rayesh wouldn't be free. He'd be a hostage forever. And deeper still, Sundar knew that throwing money at the problem would erase the symptom, but not the cause. Rayesh didn't just need rescue. He needed restoration. He needed someone to believe in him again, to remind him that his life still carried value beyond his mistakes. He turned to Rayesh, lowering his voice so only he could hear. Tell me the truth. How did it come to this? What did you sign? Rayesh's face crumpled, shame and fear mixing together. After I lost my job, I had medical issues. Hospital bills piled up. I borrowed from them. I thought I'd pay it back once I found stable work. But I never did. Every month the interest grew. I signed papers out of desperation. I didn't read them. Now, they own me. Sundar's chest tightened. Here was a man who once shaped products that changed billions of lives. Now reduced to begging for scraps of mercy. The man in the leather jacket stepped forward, breaking the moment. Enough talk. Friday. 50 grand. No excuses. And if you think about running, just remember, we know where to find you. And now, his gaze flicked to Sundar. We know who your friends are too. With that, the two men walked away into the night, leaving behind the chill of their threat, like smoke that lingered long after fire. Rayesh buried his face in his hands again, his voice muffled. I'm doomed, Sundar. I can't fight them. I can't pay them. I can't escape them. Sundar placed a hand on his shoulder, firm and steady. You're not alone anymore. I won't let them destroy you. Rayesh looked up, tears brimming in his tired eyes. Why? Why do you care this much? Sundar's answer came softly but firmly. Because everyone deserves a second chance. And because once, when I was new and uncertain, you gave me the courage to speak, now it's my turn to give it back to you. For the first time, Rayesh's lips trembled into something faintly resembling a smile, though his eyes were still clouded with fear. But before the moment could settle, Sundar's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and froze. It was an anonymous message. Back off, or you'll regret it. This is your only warning. His heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just about Rayesh anymore. They were watching him too. He looked up at Rayesh, who was staring at him, confused by the sudden shift in his expression. Sundar locked the screen, slid the phone into his pocket, and forced a calm look onto his face. But inside, he knew the truth. He was no longer just a bystander in Rayesh's tragedy. He had stepped into the center of it. And whoever those men were, they had just declared war not only on Rayesh, but on him too. The warning message still burned in Sundar's mind long after he slipped the phone back into his pocket. The words felt heavier than simple text. They were a threat, a line drawn in the sand. Whoever these men were, They wanted him to step away, to abandon Rayesh to his fate. But Sundar knew himself too well walking away was not an option. That night, Sundar lay awake, staring at the ceiling in his quiet home. His mind wandered back to his own childhood in India, to nights when his family counted every rupee, to days when his father reminded him that true strength was not about wealth or status, but about standing up when others could not. Those lessons echoed now, louder than the hum of the city outside. He realized something important. This wasn't about money. Yes, $50,000 could buy freedom from the immediate threat, but it wouldn't break the cycle. Rayesh would remain a target. Others like him would remain trapped. Sundar understood that real change required more than writing a check. It required courage, strategy, and the willingness to put himself on the line. The next morning, Sundar called Rayesh and asked him to meet at a quiet cafe far from the McDonald's. Rayesh arrived wearing the same tired uniform, his eyes swollen with sleeplessness. He sat heavily across from Sundar, as though the weight of the world clung to his shoulders. "You shouldn't be here," Rayesh whispered. "If they saw you, they'll only tighten their grip. They'll use you as leverage against me." Sundar leaned forward, his voice steady. "Rayesh, if I let fear dictate my actions, I would never have made it this far in life. They want us to feel powerless, but we're not powerless. Not you, not me." Rayesh shook his head, bitterness etched into his voice. "I signed the papers, Sundar. I gave them my life without realizing it. I was desperate. People like me don't get second chances." Sundar's eyes softened, but his words carried conviction. "Everyone deserves a second chance. Even you, especially you. I can't erase the past, but I can help you fight for your future, and I intend to." For the first time, Rayesh looked up, his eyes searching Sundar's face as if trying to see if he truly meant it. And what he saw there was not pity, but respect. Kind of respect he thought he'd lost forever. Over the next 2 hours, they spoke quietly, piecing together the truth of Rayesh's downfall. Sundar listened carefully, noting every detail. The hospital bills that had crushed him, the contract he had signed without understanding, the people he had borrowed from. It was more than just a personal tragedy, it was a system built to trap desperate men in cycles of debt. "If I pay them," Sundar said slowly, "they'll only come back for more. But if we expose them, if we bring this into the light, they'll lose their power." Rayesh's face went pale. "You don't understand. These men aren't just loan sharks. They have connections. People fear them. If you go against them, they'll come after you too." "Then let them," Sundar replied quietly. "Fear only works if we let it." "I've faced bigger storms than this, Rayesh, and I didn't come this far to watch someone I respect be broken in silence." Rayesh's hands trembled. For a moment, he almost argued, but instead, a tear slipped down his cheek. He covered his face, whispering, "I don't deserve this." "Kindness?" Sundar reached across the table, resting his hand on Rayesh's. "It's not about deserving, Rayesh. It's about humanity. You once lifted me when I was small and uncertain. Now it's my turn." The cafe grew quieter as the morning crowd thinned. Sundar pulled out a notepad from his bag, sketching out a plan the way he often did in strategy sessions at Google. Only this time, the stakes weren't market shares or product launches. They were human dignity, freedom, and survival. Step 1 was gathering information. Sundar had contacts, not in the underworld, but in law, in security, and in community organizations that worked quietly to protect vulnerable people. He would reach out discreetly, learn who these men really were, and understand the structure behind their threats. Step 2 was protection. Sundar insisted that Rayesh not stay at his shared apartment, which might already be under watch. Instead, he quietly arranged for a safe room at a small hotel under a different name, paid for in cash. Rayesh resisted at first, ashamed, but Sundar's steady insistence left him no choice. 3 was confrontation. Friday was the deadline, and Sundar knew the men would expect either payment or submission. But Sundar intended to give them neither. Instead, he would face them directly, not with fear, but with something they didn't expect: truth. Light, and authority that reached far beyond their world of shadows. The days leading up to Friday were tense. Sundar's phone buzzed with more anonymous messages, each more threatening than the last. Some warned him to mind his business. Others painted vague but chilling images of what could happen if he didn't. His security team at Google noticed his unusual unease and asked if he needed protection, but Sundar waved them off. This was not about corporate walls or bodyguards. This was personal. On Thursday night, Rajesh sat across from Sundar in the small hotel room, his eyes haunted. They won't listen, Sundar. You can't reason with men like them. They only know fear and power. They'll laugh at you. Sundar's voice was calm, but firm. They may laugh at me, but they won't break me. I've faced rooms where people underestimated me because of where I came from, because of my accent, because I didn't fit their image of power. But I proved them wrong. I'll do it again. Friday arrived like a storm cloud. The day moved, slowly, every hour stretching under the weight of what was coming. By evening, Sundar and Rajesh stood together in an abandoned parking lot, the place the men had chosen for the exchange. The air was cold, carrying the scent of rain. Headlights cut through the darkness. 2 black cars pulled in, engines humming. The doors opened, and the men stepped out, the same ones from the park. Only this time, they weren't alone. 6 others followed, their presence turning the lot into a stage of intimidation. Rayesh's knees weakened. He whispered, "This is it. This is where it ends for me." Sundar placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "No, Rajesh. This is where it begins." The man in the leather jacket walked forward, his grin sharp. "So, Pichai, did you bring our 50 grand? Or did you finally realize your friend here isn't worth the trouble?" Sundar stepped forward, his posture calm, his eyes unflinching. "I didn't bring money," he said softly. "I brought something far more dangerous. To men like you." The man laughed. "And what's that?" Sundar's lips curved into the faintest smile. "The truth." Before the men could react, Sundar raised his hand, and out of the shadows, figures stepped forward. Not gangsters, but police officers, plainclothes investigators, and a couple of reporters with cameras. Sundar had spent the past few days quietly, coordinating, gathering allies who were ready to expose the entire operation. The Rajesh gasped, his eyes wide with disbelief. But Sundar's calm never wavered. The man in the leather jacket's grin faded, replaced by anger. "You made a mistake, Pichai, a big one." And as his men reached into their jackets, tension rippled through the night like a wire stretched too tight, seconds away from snapping. The parking lot was silent for one breathless moment. The kind of silence that comes before a storm. Rain clouds rolled above, the air damp with tension, headlights casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Sundar stood tall, calm but unyielding, while Rajesh trembled beside him, caught between fear and a flicker of impossible hope. The men in leather and hoodies stiffened as they noticed the shapes emerging from the darkness. Plainclothes officers, blending with reporters holding cameras ready. The element of secrecy, their most powerful weapon, was gone. Their eyes darted nervously, and suddenly the numbers they relied on didn't seem so overwhelming. "You think this scares us?" The man in the leather jacket sneered, though his voice carried a crack of doubt. "You brought cops and journalists. You think shining a light will make us disappear? We've lived in shadows longer than you've been alive." Sundar stepped forward, his voice low but cutting through the night. "You've lived in shadows because people were too afraid to speak. You thrived because good men like Rajesh thought they had no choice but to suffer silently. But silence ends tonight. I'm not here to negotiate with fear. I'm here to show that even the darkest corner can be lit." The words carried not like a speech in a conference hall, but like a truth carved into the air itself. Rajesh, hearing them, felt something stir inside him, a memory of his former self. The man who once stood tall at Google, who once believed in possibility. The man in a hoodie scowled and gestured to his companions. "Take them. Both of them, now." Several men stepped forward, hands reaching into jackets. But before they could move further, flashlights and badges snapped into the open. Plainclothes officers raised their voices. Police, hands where we can see them. Chaos erupted. Some of the men froze, stunned by the sudden authority. Others panicked, shouting curses as they tried to scatter. One ran toward the cars, only to be tackled by officers lying in wait. Another raised his fist, only to be slammed back by a police baton. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing every second their faces, their threats, their collapse. But amid the chaos, the man in the leather jacket didn't back down. His eyes burned with hatred as he lunged toward Rayesh, grabbing his collar and snarling, "You brought this on yourself. You think you can escape us? You'll never be free." Rayesh froze, terror flashing across his face. But before he could crumble, Sundar moved. His hand shot out, pulling the man back with surprising strength. Sundar's voice, calm but firm, cut through the chaos. "No. He will be free, because he is not alone anymore." The police swarmed in, prying the man off and pinning him to the ground. His shouts dissolved into curses muffled by cold pavement. The rest of the gang was rounded up one by one, until the parking lot that had once radiated fear now stood filled with flashing police lights and the click of camera shutters. Rayesh stood frozen, chest heaving, eyes wide as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. For years, he had lived under the weight of fear, shame, and debts that grew like chains. And now, in one night, those chains had been broken not by money, not by escape, but by courage, truth, and someone who refused to let him be forgotten. Sundar turned to him, his face steady but kind. "It's over, Rayesh. You're free." But Rayesh shook his head, his voice trembling. "Free? Sundar, I still have nothing. No home, no family, no job. I've lost everything." Sundar's eyes softened, but there was steel in his tone. "You haven't lost everything. You still have yourself. And you still have people who believe in you. That's where rebuilding begins. You taught me once that leadership isn't about titles. It's about standing for what's right. Tonight, you reminded me again. Your story isn't over. Not yet." Rayesh's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't only of grief. They carried the fragile beginnings of hope, a weight slowly lifting after years of despair in the days that followed. The story of the parking lot confrontation spread quickly. Reporters published articles about the hidden debt traps that had ensnared countless lives. The names and faces of the men arrested were broadcast across local news, unraveling a network that had operated in silence for too long. But more than the headlines, people spoke about the unlikely image, the CEO of Google standing in a parking lot beside a former director who had fallen into poverty, refusing to abandon him. It was a picture of humility and loyalty that resonated far beyond Silicon Valley. Sundar, true to his quiet nature, didn't make grand speeches about the incident. He didn't need to. His actions had spoken louder than words. Instead, he focused on what mattered most, helping Rayesh rebuild with careful steps. He arranged counseling for Rayesh, medical support for his lingering health issues, and most importantly, a role back at Google, not a director's chair, but a position where his experience and wisdom could guide young engineers again. Sundar didn't hand it as charity, but as recognition of worth that had never truly disappeared. On the first day back at the Google campus, Rayesh walked through the doors nervously. His old colleagues looked at him, some surprised, others unsure. But when Sundar himself walked beside him, hand on his shoulder, the room shifted. Respect filled the air. And for the first time in years, Rayesh felt like he belonged again. Months later, he would quietly tell Sundar, "I thought my story was finished. But you reminded me that even broken chapters can lead to powerful endings. You gave me back my dignity, and for that, I will never forget you." Sundar smiled softly, his reply simple but profound. "I didn't give it back, Rayesh. You never lost it. You just needed someone to remind you where it was."